Hey everyone, there are a bunch of MIDI CCs that allow you to do things on the OPZ that I didn't think were possible at all. So I'm going to show you them by adjusting them and showing you just a couple examples for a couple of the really big deal highlight ones, not all of them. I'm going to show you how I can adjust it on the digatone and have it affect the OPZ. You don't need the digatone, you just need anything that can send out the CCs that I'm going to mention on the channels that I'm going to mention to the OPZ. So let's go ahead and start off with one of the more mind-blowing things, and that's going to be putting an LFO onto the step count. So that basically means that I'm going to put an LFO from the digatone, and I'm going to be constantly varying the step count, or how far the sequencer goes before it repeats. So you normally would change that by pressing track and shift, and then selecting the number of steps before it repeats. But I'm going to put a MIDI CC 60 onto channel 1, which is the kick track, and we're on the kick track right now. And then I'm going to enable that value. And from here, I'm going to turn on, well, I'll show you the value that it responds to the value. So I have the value at 16 already because it's 16 steps. Anything above 16 doesn't do anything. Anything below 16, though, you can see that change. And you can change it from 1 to 16. So this means that if you have an Electron device and you want an OPZ track to repeat after a certain point, you can use this to accomplish that and like have just a couple steps omitted every other pass or whatever you want to do. Anyway, so let's go ahead and assign an LFO to that value. First of all, let's put it to 8 to begin with. There we go. And then I've got this already assigned to value 1. I'm going to make it a bit of a negative depth, I guess. Actually, let's have it go up and then down. It should be 8, I think. Let's try that, or about 8. And let's just make it that speed. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, okay, so you can see how it's going up and down. I could change the wave shape of this to, square wave. I could do a sine wave and it'll just spend a bit longer at the top and the bottom, I think. Don't quote me on that. There's all the different shapes I could do, but you can see that this can create some interesting patterns. And so I don't actually remember what I put here. I know I have a 4 on the floor, and I guess I got some cymbals and stuff here. So probably just a very, very basic drum beat. And we'll see how the sequencer responds to, let me clear all those off. We'll see how the sequencer responds to that. So you see how it's constantly kind of shifting around. And so what this means is that it will eventually repeat. And the cool part about that is that you can then use the depth of this, the speed, and all these other things to vary how the sequencer behaves. You might notice that it's playing the first one a whole lot. One way that you could kind of accommodate that or adjust for that is just have it play one of every 4 times. Something else that I find kind of fun is adding a jump 9, so it's constantly kind of catching back up and jumping all over. So there's a bunch of stuff that you could do here, and a bunch of different ways that you could generate patterns by sending an LFO to CC60 and having CC60 on whatever channel, the channel of whichever track you're trying to control. So I don't know that these would do much on some of the the performance track or like the lighting or the motion track, but it definitely has some pretty neat applications for kind of randomizing different tracks here. And you have to send it per track, unfortunately, but I still think it's a really cool thing. And that's that's about as crazy as we're going to get in terms of like how intricate things are, or as complicated, I should say, as we're going to get. The reason I have this pulled up is because in the guide, 21.6 is the incoming MIDI table, and the first 16 are everything you might expect because they're just the first 4 parameter pages here. But then after that, it gets really interesting. You start to be able to sequence a lot of stuff that I'm not so experienced with sequencers. I can't say this with certainty, but I don't know how common it is to be able to sequence these things on other devices. So you can sequence the portamento. That's not that exciting to me because I could already do that with step components. You can sequence note style, so that means that you can sequence it and change it from monophonic to polyphonic or to legato if you have an external device to be able to sequence those changes. There's a whole bunch here that you can control within the system. So tracks have individual gains that are separate from the gain of the group. So like the kick has its own individual track gain. And so that gives you a different way to mute it. And it also gives you something else that you can back off a bit if it's really running into that compressor, and you can reduce just the kick's gain if you want. So pretty neat, and I'll probably show an example of that in just a bit. But you can mute tracks, or you can select mute groups. And most of these are track specific, and so you'll see that by this track channel 1 through 16. But if it says any, it means that it'll accept a value on any of the channels, and it'll do what it says here. So for example, changing mute group, it doesn't matter what channel gets that. Tempo and swing changes, it doesn't matter what channel it gets. So you can change the OPZ's tempo mid-sequence, you just need another device to do it. And so at that point, you might as well have just, synced it to this other device, but it's something else that you could do if you wanted. I don't fully understand how 0 to 127 map onto the OPZ's tempo range of, I think, 40 to 200. I have not really sure about that. But you can also change the pattern and even change the project if you want to without using program change at all. You can sequence, and then this is what I just started with. You can sequence the track step count. So that's CC60, and it goes to channel 1 to 16, and its range is 1 to 16. So 17 to 127, it's the same as 16. There's nothing weird in there that I've found so far. Cool thing though, and this is where I was going to go next, is you can sequence the step length. So step length in the case of the OPZ, let me turn off this. Step length in the case of the OPZ is just saying how many, it's the same as scale on an Electron device. How many 16th notes are these taking up? So we have it at 1, which is the default, and you could keep it at 1, and you could sequence it periodically to be 10, because 10 is gate step. And assuming that you're not using this for some other purpose, and you're not having this, send or receive things to modular gear, that effectively pauses the counter right where it's at. Let's try an example of that. So I'm going to, first of all, I'm just going to turn off this LFO completely, set the speed to nothing, and then set the depth to nothing. Okay, now I'm going to re-enable this value, but I'm going to change it to being, let's see, 61. Oops, I went way past it. Here we go. So now it's 61. And 0 and 1 are 1, but as you can see, I can change it from here. Everything from, let's see, 10 and above is going to be 0, and that is gate. So what I can do here, just as an example, is we'll start here, and I'll just, oh, right, I have to actually, I'm new to the digatone, as I've probably said too many times. Let's do that. I wonder if I can do that without changing the length of it. Well, let's see what happens. Oh, this is zoomed way out, so let's see what happens here. Okay, yeah, so it did set it to 0 then. And it's paused it right here. Oh, but there's multiple pages, so it would take a bit to go back around to that. But my point here was just that you can pause it by adding, sending MIDI CC 6110 to any one track, and it's only going to pause that track, but I still think that's a pretty useful function if you just want to kind of have especially as applications, if you want to make things a little glitchy, or if you just want to add in a rest and you don't want to do all the weird step component stuff that I love doing, because I completely understand why somebody would maybe hate that. Next up, one thing that I'd always wished you could do. So as you might be aware, you have mute groups, and so that means that you can mute all the drums, and then you can have the second mute group where all the drums are back, right? But the problem is that you have to change that during the track, and so very often you'll see tutorials, and I've referenced this too, where people recommend that you just copy it, and then over here you have the other mute group, and then you could just sequence it that way, and that's great, and that works really well. But this actually sending CC to the, let's see, which one is it? CC55. So let's pull that up, change it to CC55. We'll be able to change the mute group that is selected. So right now we have 0. I'll put one that's 0 there, and I'll put one that's 1 right here. I have successfully now sequenced it so that this is mute group 0, or mute group 1 in this case, and then mute group 1 or mute group 2 on the OPZ. And so I'm going to hit play and then pull up the mute groups. And halfway through this 16-step pattern, this one measure pattern, right here it's going to change mute groups and it's going to bring the drums back in. So I'll have the mixer up for it. So the mixer is held up now because I pressed it 3 times. Of course it didn't work. There we go. So now you can see it going from group 1 to group 2. So this isn't necessarily a great application of that, but there's a lot more helpful ways that you could use this. For example, if you have like a lead track and you want it to be brought in later on, you can use another device to sequence that, and you don't have to do all the weird step component math that I enjoy doing. Okay, so let's clear those steps off, and let's go to the next one, which is going to be tracks have an individual gain, and it's separate from the group gain, and it's also separate from the volume. So I'm actually going to pull up, I'm going to have gain right here, and then I'm going to have volume. I'll put that on the value below that. So let's pull that up. So volume is 16. And I know that because it's the 16th parameter if you go in the order of the pages. So volume is 16, and track gain is 50. So let's go over here, and let's change the channel to being, let's go to the kick track. So channel 1. Okay, let's play. All right, we're back. The mute groups were on. Okay, so now let's go ahead and play that. Let me go to the 4th parameter page of the kick track. So this is volume, and this is the one that I assigned to the bottom, I believe. Yes. Okay, so volume is basically off. Let's max out the volume on the kick track. And let's I can actually back off the kick track's gain by just, let's see, by adjusting CC50. So it's separate from the overall gain. I don't fully understand it, but it is gain. It's another way that you can mute things. You could use another device to mute things. If you could send, a CC to 50 with a value of 0, it'll mute that track for that step. But I found it pretty helpful so far in kind of dialing things back off of the compressor at that final stage of before the group, with the group and the punch, the group gain and then the punch. Sorry, I'm having a hard time articulating that. Here, yeah, so let's go for an extreme example here. Now so I'll back off the volume too. That's just too extreme overall, oh well. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. I don't know if it's as helpful as I'm thinking it is right now, but I'm just kind of excited because of just giving another way of tweaking the volume and another way to mute things if you want. Okay, so next up, you can adjust the tempo, but I don't understand the values yet. I'm not going to really go through that. I do want to talk about sequencing which is the active track. So I thought this was really interesting. Let me turn off that one, and let's change it so that we'll go down to this other table here, and that one is 102. So let's go to 102, and I'm going to go ahead and, oops, I guess I hadn't thought that makes sense. Okay, we'll start there. And one thing I just want to show is just kind of an interesting idea is I'm going to change the scale here to being, oops, wrong one, to being 1/8. You could, in theory, start off with, oops, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Start off with value 1. Over here, let's go to, actually, no, this is maybe a better example. 5. 6, 8. I don't know. What I'm wanting to show you is that if I hit play here now, it's going to start off and it's going to change me to the bass track. And if you had channel 1 to active track and you had another keyboard going into here, you could play it on channel 1 and it will send those notes to the bass track right now. And once it gets here, it'll be sending those notes to the lead track. Once it gets here, it'll send those notes to the chords track. So this has some interesting, I think, applications for anybody who wants to perform live with an OPZ, because you could, using other gear, sequence, or if you have like foot pedal or something like that, sequence and change which is the active track on the OPZ. And I just think that that's pretty useful, especially because then you can very quickly change, you know, what external piece of gear that's being sent to as well. I think that's all pretty cool. Parameter page. This one is just kind of neat. I don't really see a super big use for it personally, but you can change which parameter page you're on that same CC 102, except we're going to change that where we're on channel 2 instead of 1. I don't understand why sometimes these are removed 1, like sometimes it's 0 to 15 and other times it's 1 to 16. I don't know, but this one's kind of neat because I didn't know that this was possible here. Let's go ahead and go to that value. And so we're now on page 1, 2, 3, and 4. So these are the same as going from parameter page 1, 2, 3, and 4. And just repeats over and over. 0 is weird. 0 only controls parameter 1, and then they all control the same thing. I don't know if there's some other trick you could possibly do with that or whatever, but I got really excited because I went to the ARP track and so I went to the ARP track and I was like, oh my gosh, I found the LFO on the ARP track, and I didn't, but came close to it. I got really excited though. Okay, so let's move on and talk about changing patterns without using program change. I don't know how to use program change. I'm not experienced with it. I get a bit intimidated by it, so I was really happy to learn this. If you send 16 to 103 or 17 to 103, it will change which pattern you're on. So let's go ahead, and I just locked in the project page here, and let's see what happens. So I haven't actually used this yet, so this is going to be new to me as well. So we got to change this to 103. Oh, it had already changed something. Okay. So we already changed, oh, because I'm on channel 2. So let's change to, was I on 0? Yeah, I was on 0. And what I'm going to put here, well, I'll put in the same spots as before. So let's put this at 0, then 1, then 2. And let's see if that does what I'm hoping, which is play this, then this, then this. Cool. So it does exactly that. And that was pretty quick as well. I'm not sure if it could cut off, you know, it might cut off the kick or something like that. I don't know. Right now the kick keeps doubling anyway, so I guess that doesn't make a huge difference. So I think that that's all really cool stuff, and I think that there's a ton of applications. I'll be doing more videos as I learn more on this. I'll be figuring out more applications. I'm working on a template for the, well, as you can see, I'm working on a template for the Digatone to use with the OPZ that'll allow you to quickly adjust these kind of hidden settings that you can't adjust otherwise. And I think it's just going to open up a whole lot. It really will make it easier to make the OPZ the center of things. I think it's going to make it, I'm just thinking that the OPZ is very much meant to be part of a larger system. And I'm excited because I think that this makes that really a lot more accessible than I thought it was before. Anyway, I hope you learned something. Let me know if you have any questions, and thank you for watching.